In the northern part of India, there was a kingdom called Kapilavastu. Kapilavastu was located on the southern rim of the Himalayas. The kingdom was ruled by King Suddhodana of the Sakya clan. Queen Maya was his wife. Queen Maya was pregnant for 10 months. According to the ancient Indian custom, she must return to her parents' home to give birth to the baby. On her way, she passed through the beautiful Lumbini Park. Queen Maya gave birth to the dignified prince in Lumbini Park. Queen Maya returned to Kapilavastu with her new-born prince. An old sage, Asita, came to visit the prince in order to read his facial features. The old sage observed that the baby possessed great virtue in his countenance and foretold that the boy would leave home to cultivate and attain ultimate enlightenment. The old sage knelt down to worship the prince. Without realizing it, King Suddhodana followed the old sage and knelt down to worship his son. 5 days after the prince's birth, a ceremony was held to name the prince. He was named Siddhartha, which meant realization of all goals. During the naming ceremony, a young scholar named Kaudinya stated with deep conviction, "The prince will abandon the throne in pursuit of supreme wisdom and will attain ultimate enlightenment to become the supreme teacher of the world." King Suddhodana, however, wanted his son to inherit the throne when he grew up. On the 7th day after the prince's birth, Queen Maya died of illness, which saddened everyone in the kingdom. The prince's aunt, Lady Maha Prajapati, took the responsibility of rearing the prince. When the prince turned 8, the king hired all the best teachers in the land to educate him. The prince learned the art of archery and made extraordinary progress. The prince respected his teachers very much. The prince learned the art of driving a chariot. The prince treated his horse gently. The prince's heart was full of mercy and benevolence. He treated all animals kindly. For example, one day he stopped one of his servants from beating a snake with a stick. Prince Siddhartha had a cousin named Devadatta who was entirely different in character. One day, Devadatta shot down a flying swan. Prince Siddhartha rushed over to rescue the wounded bird. The prince removed the arrow from the bird's wing, wrapped the wound softly, and patted the bird. Devadatta was angry and tried to grab the bird from the prince's hands, but Prince Siddhartha stopped him and said, "While the swan is still alive, it belongs to the person who rescued it." The two boys started to argue. Scholars were invited to settle the argument in a conference. However, each scholar had a different opinion. Then one young scholar stood up and said, "When the swan is alive, it should belong to the person who rescued it, not to the person who tried to kill it." Siddhartha carefully nursed the swan until its wound completely healed. Then he let it fly away. Ancient India was an agricultural nation. People considered tilling the land and producing food grains most important. The Royal Tilling Festival was held once a year. To encourage participation, the king and his ministers all attended the ceremony. King Suddhodana took Prince Siddhartha to the ceremony. King Suddhodana was in charge of this ceremony. After the ceremony, everybody enjoyed a delightful feast, but the prince sat under a tree in deep meditation. The prince thought, "Today everyone is happy, but the oxen will have to toil even harder in the fields." When the prince noticed that all stronger animals prey on weaker animals, his heart was filled with compassion for all weaker animals. The prince meditated on how humans and all other beings indeed lived in great pain. After the royal tilling festival, King Suddhodana took the prince back to the palace. King Suddhodana ordered to have 3 splendid palaces built for the prince to live in and enjoy. The 3 palaces were built for the prince to live in for 3 different seasons: the winter, the summer, and the rainy season. There was a beautiful garden in the back of each palace. However, the prince did not enjoy these material comforts and found them meaningless. King Suddhodana held a meeting with his ministers and decided to choose a beautiful girl as the prince's wife. The king ordered the most beautiful girls in the kingdom to be sent to the palace. Each of the beautiful girls walked individually in front of the prince. Each girl received a present from the prince when passing by him. One girl of extraordinary beauty was late, so she entered the palace hurriedly. As all the presents were already given out, the prince had to take off his precious necklace to give to the girl. This girl was Princess Yasodhara. The ministers reported to the king what they saw. So the king sent a minister to the city of Devadarsita to visit the girl's father, King Supabuddha, proposing that Princess Yasodhara be married to Prince Siddhartha. According to the Sakya clan's custom, when a prince is about to marry, he must invite all the brave young men in the county to participate in various contests. Prince Siddhartha followed this custom. In the archery contest, the prince shot farther than all the other contestants. In the swordsmanship contest, the prince was also the honorable winner. In the horse racing contest, the prince raced faster than all the other contestants as well. As some of the contestants refused to accept the outcome of the contest, all of them were ordered to ride a fierce black horse. One by one, they were thrown to the ground by this horse. Even the best-known horseman, Prince Aniruddha, was thrown down to the ground. When it was Prince Siddhartha's turn, he approached the horse and gently patted the animal, rubbing its nose and murmuring a few words into its ears. Suddenly, the fierce horse calmed down, let the prince mount its back, and obediently followed the prince's instructions. Everyone concurred that Prince Siddhartha was the best among all the contestants, and King Supabuddha agreed to marry his beautiful daughter to Prince Siddhartha. King Suddhodana was in charge of the wedding ceremony. The king ordered the girls who excelled at singing and dancing to live in the palace and keep the prince entertained. The king also ordered the construction of high walls around the palace to prevent the prince from leaving the palace grounds. But the prince was not happy inside the palace. He was eager to see the outside world. The king reluctantly granted the prince's request and ordered the people to clean the roads and decorate their homes with colorful banners. As the prince's carriage toured the city, people lined up on both sides of the roads to welcome the prince. All of a sudden, an old hunchback appeared in front of the prince's carriage. Before anyone could stop the old man, the prince had already seen him. The prince was appalled at the sight of the old man's appearance. Chandaka, the prince's servant, told the prince, "After living long enough, a person will become old and feeble." The prince realized that all of his family and he himself would become old and feeble when the time came. The prince was no longer in the mood to continue the tour and ordered his driver to take him back to the palace. Back at the palace, the prince meditated every day on how to avoid becoming old and feeble. King Suddhodana was worried when he learned that the prince was not happy. The prince asked for permission from his father to go outside the palace grounds again. This time, he went disguised as a young man from a noble family, followed by Chandaka. The prince saw people at work. Some blacksmiths were making different kinds of tools. There were shops on both sides of the streets. Many people were doing business. The prince was glad to see people hard at work. Suddenly, the prince heard a moan from the roadside. Turning his head, the prince saw a man with purple discoloration on his face and body. The man lay on the ground, trying but unable to get up. A compassionate and merciful person The prince rushed over to help the sick person sit up to alleviate his pain. When Chandaka saw this, he advised the prince not to touch the sick man, fearing the prince might contract disease. The prince was appalled by the suffering from illness. Chandaka told the prince that when the patient's illness became more serious, the person would die. Chandaka told the prince, when a person dies, he will lose all consciousness, and his body will become stiff and then will be carried out for cremation. The corpse is then placed on piles of wood, and a fire is started to burn the corpse. The prince felt the fearfulness of death, as nobody could escape from it. After returning to his palace, the prince kept thinking to himself about the fearfulness of old age, illness, and death, and wanted to find a way to be freed from these troubles. One day, when the prince was relaxing in his garden, he saw a monk in a yellow robe who looked very peaceful. The prince was captivated by the idea of becoming a sramana. Just at that time, someone came to report to the prince that his wife had given birth to a baby boy, who was later named Rahula. To keep the prince happy, King Suhodana ordered more beautiful girls to sing and dance for the prince's pleasure. But the prince was in no mood to enjoy the song and dance, as his mind was preoccupied by thoughts of old age, illness, and death. Eventually, he became so tired he fell asleep. The girls also stopped singing and dancing and lay down to rest. When the prince awoke, he noticed the girls no longer appeared beautiful while sleeping. The prince decided to break away from all confinements and leave home to seek the ultimate truth. He quietly took one final look at his sleeping wife and their newborn son, not wanting to wake them. In the silence of the night, the prince mounted his faithful horse and exited the city gate. He was accompanied only by his servant, Chandaka. Upon arriving at the Anuma River, the prince dismounted his horse and slashed short his long hair with his sword. He ordered Chandaka to take his horse and his clothes back to the palace and report to his father. At age 29, the prince had left home in search of the ultimate truth. Prince Siddhartha reached Rajagara, the capital city of Magdha. Each morning, he went into the city on his alms rounds. After receiving his food for the day, the prince would return to his dwelling. Because of Prince Siddhartha's noble appearance, people showed great respect for him. King Bibisara of Magadha also came to visit him. One day, Prince Siddhartha saw shepherds driving large flocks of sheep into the city of Rajagaha. When Siddhartha learned that the sheep were to be used as sacrifices, He followed the shepherds there, holding a little wounded lamb in his arms. A group of fire worshippers were building a large fire for a ceremony to worship the heavenly gods, which was also attended by their king. When the ceremony leader raised his knife to kill the sheep, Siddhartha immediately walked up to stop him. Siddhartha told the crowd that they would not be rewarded by killing animals. Instead, the killing would bring harm to them in the future, and that people should show kindness to all animals. The king and the fire worshippers took Siddhartha's words to heart and abandoned their plan of killing the animals. Siddhartha left the city of Rajagaha to continue his journey in search of great teachers. Siddhartha studied diligently with Arada Kalama, a sage of great learning and great virtue, and soon became as knowledgeable as his teacher. Arada Kalama taught Siddhartha how to meditate to achieve extraordinary tranquility of the mind. However, this knowledge could not answer the fundamental question of life and death. Therefore, Siddhartha left Arada Kalama to look for other teachers. Siddhartha studied with another sage, Udraka Ramaputra, and again he quickly became as knowledgeable as his teacher. Udraka Ramaputra taught Siddhartha how to silence his mind in order to become completely detached from all things, ideas, and feelings. Nevertheless, this knowledge still could not solve the problem of life and death. Siddhartha decided to stop his search for more teachers. Instead, he headed to Kaya Mountain, where there lived many Salamanas of various cults who left their families to practice asceticism. They believed that through the practice of asceticism in this life, one would be able to obtain happiness or be reborn in heavenly realms in the next life. These Sramanas were gradually reduced to skin and bones as a result of decreasing their daily food intake. Siddhartha chose a scenic and quiet place at Uruvilva and stayed there to practice austere asceticism. There were 5 Sramanas who had followed Siddhartha and became his attendants. They joined Siddhartha in his practice of austere asceticism. Eventually, they would be known as the 5 bhikshus. Siddhartha practiced austere asceticism diligently. He started fasting and became so thin that his bones were clearly visible. One day he fainted from exhaustion and weakness. Just then a shepherd boy passed by. After drinking the milk offered by the shepherd boy, Siddhartha came to. One evening the prince heard a group of girls singing, "When the strings are too loose, the lute will not make any sound. But when the strings are too tight, they will break. Only when the strings are not too loose nor too tight will the lute produce wonderful music." It then dawned upon Siddhartha that practicing asceticism 112. It then dawned upon Siddhartha that practicing asceticism too strictly was just like tightening the lute's strings too much. He decided to adopt the middle way in his practice. stopped his practice of austere asceticism and went on alms rounds and started eating again. The 5 Shramanas thought that Siddhartha had become lazy by abandoning austere asceticism, so they left him and went to Magadhava to live. Siddhartha received an offering of rice porridge from a village girl named Sujata. He also received an offering of a bundle of straw from a straw peddler. Siddhartha made a mat with a straw and vowed that he would not rise from the mat until he had attained ultimate enlightenment. He then focused on this goal in his meditation. Vivid images of his past would sometimes appear in his mind, but they would disappear with his deep meditation. Siddhartha eventually acquired the ability to be aware of all his previous lives, see all things, and know their future rebirths. He thus came to realize that the unceasing cycle of death and rebirth of all beings was solely a manifestation of one's karma, that good causes led to good results and bad causes led to bad results. He also came to understand that the ultimate causes of the endless cycle of death and rebirth were greed, hate, and ignorance. Finally, he acquired as Ravaksaya the ability to eliminate all defilements, freeing himself from all problems caused by life and death. At the age of 35, Siddhartha had attained supreme enlightenment and become the Buddha. A proud Brahmana approached Buddha and asked him, "How can one become a noble Brahmana?" Buddha replied, "In order to become a noble Brahmana, one has to abandon all evil, set aside his pride, pursue extensive learning, and practice pure living." Two merchants passed by Buddha. Seeing his calm and dignified appearance, they reverently offered him exquisite food and requested that Buddha accept them as his disciples. In his observation, Buddha found that most people had strong desires by nature, and few had little desire. The latter were more suited for practicing the Dharma, just as it was easier for lotus flowers that grew above water to receive sunshine. Because his heart was filled with mercy and benevolence, Buddha decided to propagate the Dharma, starting from the 5 Shramanas. When the 5 Shramanas saw the Buddha approaching them from a distance, they plotted amongst themselves not to greet him. But when the Buddha walked closer, they witnessed his incomparably noble and brilliant manner, and without realizing it, they walked up to greet him. Buddha explained to the 5 Shramanas the way by which he had attained enlightenment, transcending birth and death. The 5 disciples were still doubtful, wondering how the Buddha could possibly claim to have attained enlightenment after abandoning his practice of austere asceticism. Buddha taught the 5 Sramanas the Dharma-Cakra-Parvatana Sutra, and they became the first Buddhist bhiksus. One day, the son of a rich family in Margadava by the name of Yasos came to see the Buddha and asked the Buddha to let him become a monk. Yasa's entire family took refuge in the Buddha Dharma, and more than 50 of his friends also became Buddhist bhiksus. Buddha now had 60 bhiksus. He sent them out to propagate the Buddha Dharma in other lands. The Buddha went to the village of Uruviva to teach and enlighten the people. There he converted 3 brothers who were leaders of a knot-hair cult, as well as their 1,000 followers. Then Buddha took his disciples to the city of Rajagaha to teach the Buddha Dharma to King Bimbisara and his people. After taking refuge in the Buddha Dharma, King Bimbisara built a dwelling amongst bamboo and offered it to Buddha. This dwelling later became known as the Bamboo Grove. One morning, Buddha encountered a young man by the name of Sujata, who stood in the middle of the road, bowing to the east, the south, the west, the north, the heaven, and the earth. He then spread grain in each of these directions. Buddha asked Sujata why he performed such a ritual. Sujata replied that he was honoring his father's last words.